actually wondering if maybe we could get everybody to move together, because everybody's quite spread out in the auditorium. Could you at least make sure that you're sitting next to somebody, because I will be asking you to talk to each other. So if you're sitting alone, could you shuffle up so that you're with somebody that you could talk to? Can I just ask you to do that while I just set the computer up here? While we wait for the presentation to appear, I'd just like to say thank you very much to AmityUniversity and especially to Professor Shikali Bakshi for inviting me to come and speak to you this morning. It's very nice to be back in Lucknow. I've been here a couple of times now. I'd also like to just ask a few questions just to get to know who I'm speaking to a little bit. Can I just ask, if you are a teacher of English, could you put your hand up so I can see? Okay, some of you. Teacher of English? Okay. If you are a teacher of another subject other than English? Some of you, okay. If you are an academic, you're doing research mainly, maybe as well as some teaching, but you're also engaged in research. Okay, so you're doing lots of things. And if you're a student, could you put your hand up if you are studying at the moment? Okay, thank you. Actually, what about people who fall into an other or miscellaneous category, right? Okay. All right, well, I'll do my best to try to speak to all of you, hoping that my presentation is good. I suppose then the first thing that I wanted to ask you, and for this I just want you to have a chat with the person sitting next to you. What do you define as success for you? Well, how do you measure if you have been successful in the job that you do? If you do teaching in the classroom, I'd like you to think about it from that perspective. If you're not currently teaching, think about it just with whatever your day-to-day role includes. How do you measure whether or not you've been successful? So could I just ask you now to take a moment just to discuss that with the person next to you? Show you a photo. Does anybody know who this man is? This man is very special to me. His name is Jensen Button. He's a Formula One race driver, racing car driver. And if he hasn't been to India yet, I'm sure he will be coming shortly in the future, as I know that everyone in Delhi is very excited about the new Formula One racetrack. Now, Jensen Button is of particular significance to me because he comes from the same small town in England that I come from, 20,000 people. And so you can imagine that everybody is very excited about the fact that we live in the same town that Jensen Button comes from. Although I have to add, he doesn't live there anymore, he lives in Monaco. So perhaps by that we can measure that he has been successful. But the point is that he's a Formula One race car driver. So for him, measuring success is quite straightforward. Does he win the race or does he not win the race? He comes from my hometown. We have a bridge in our hometown which is named after Jensen Button. So I think if you have a bridge named after you, you can be pretty sure that you've been a success as well. So for him, it's quite straightforward, in my opinion, for him to measure whether or not he's been successful. Failure and success. But I think for teachers and educators and people who are involved in this sort of slightly messy field of education, it can be much more difficult to measure whether or not we've been successful. For teachers, one of the ways that you may have discussed just now, that we can measure whether or not we've been successful is the results that our students get and how they perform on tests or exams. But we all need to remember that tests or exam results, of course, they tell us something, but they don't tell us everything. And we might have a student who gets 90% on his final exams. Fantastic, success for him. And also perhaps you could reflect that on yourself as a teacher. I have been successful, my student has got 90%. But can we really be sure that it's us that has made the difference to that student to enable them to get the 90%? Maybe they're having private tutoring somewhere else, and it's actually the private tutor who's really made a difference. And what about the student who gets 55%? But in fact, that same student, when he or she started learning at the beginning of the year, he or she would only have been able to manage getting 20% of the exam. So this student has worked incredibly hard, and although at the end 55% is not a fantastic result, they have made huge progress over the course of the year. So that is also a success. So I think it's very important to think about all the other variables that come into this, and it's not just about numbers, it's not just about things that are easily measured. And with that example for teachers, I think we can broaden that out to all of us doing research or working in other areas of education and other aspects of education. It can be very, very difficult to measure whether or not we are successful. So something that I want to carry on as a theme for the rest of the talk is thinking about how do we measure it, and what are the things that we measure our success against. So perhaps if we're thinking about it in terms of teachers, we can think about what makes a good teacher, or if you're not a teacher, what makes a good educator, what makes a good researcher, what makes a good academic, what makes a good student. What are the things that we can consider when we're thinking about what we want to be successful at. And if we start to break that down a little bit more, it's much easier to start to measure it. So again, just with the person next to you, just very quickly, 5 or 6 things that make a good teacher. What do you think makes a good teacher? What characteristics does he or she need to have? Just for 1 minute, you could just discuss that. Patience. We need to have time for ourselves and also for our students. We need to be aware of the things that we are good at and the things that we are not so good at, and to be able to act on those things. And I guess that kind of underpins all of this, to be aware about whether or not we are patient or not. We need to really make sure that we're meeting the students' needs. We need to be supportive and encouraging of our students as well, and not only of our students, but also of ourselves and of other teachers that we work with. And I think those 2 aspects of being supportive are things that we sometimes forget. Again, underpinning all of these things is having an awareness of the students' needs. As I said, having an awareness of our own strengths and weaknesses, but also of the students as well. And we also need to make sure that we try to be motivated, because as we know, motivation comes across. Our students know if we are not enjoying the job that we do. They know if we don't feel motivated to come to class or to come and do the job that we're doing. Our colleagues know if we are not feeling motivated about whatever project we happen to be working on at the moment. So we need to think about ways that we can continue to be motivated and to maintain that level of motivation. And finally, I would argue that we also need to be organised. And I've seen plenty of teachers in the past who have managed to do many of these other things, but organisation is just, I didn't know you were behind on the screen. Sorry about that. So, yes, I've seen plenty of teachers in the past who are knowledgeable, they're patient, they're creative, but they're incredibly disorganised. And this is something that they need to work on and think about. Now, if we think about also the things that make a good learner, and you can marry these 2 things together, because not only does having a good learner enable us to be better teachers as well, to work together to achieve the same things that we want to, the success that we want to reach. But as teachers and as educators and as anybody working within the field, we continue to learn ourselves, of course. So in order to be a good teacher, we also have to be a good learner ourselves. And as you'll see, many of these things overlap with the things that I've just been talking about. Participating, taking part, making sure that we and our students are engaged and taking part in the activities that are taking place in the classroom. This idea of having an awareness of needs is the same thing as with the teachers that I mentioned just now. Having an awareness of what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and being able to act on those. And I think that's quite a difficult, I think it's very easy for me to say that, but it's quite a difficult one for teachers and for students to to actually be able to articulate. What is it that I am good at and that I'm not so good at? What do I need? Especially when it comes to language, because we need to think carefully about what our students are going to be using the language for, and therefore help them with those areas as they are needed. We need to practice as learners, and as teachers, and as educators. We need to continue to make sure that we are carrying on with what we are doing, and keep going in different things rather than just, if something doesn't work out or we're not successful in something, just putting it to one side and deciding we're not going to do that. Practice will make perfect. Similarly with what we said previously about teachers, learners also need to have patience. They need to understand that things don't just come automatically, they take time. It's not possible to become fluent in a language overnight, we all know that. But it's also not possible to become the best teacher-educator overnight either. It's something that takes time and is an ongoing process. And we will probably never get to that aim, the goal that we have in the end of being absolutely brilliant at every single thing that we do. Motivation, again, and of course organisation. It's not just up to the teacher to be organised, it's also up to us. But there's one thing here that I haven't mentioned for either being a good teacher or being a good learner. And it's the one thing that I think will really make the difference when we're talking about whether or not we are going to be successful or if things are not going to work out. And I believe that that thing is risk-taking. Does the learner take risks? Do we as teachers or as educators or as academics take risks with what we are doing? And if we don't take risks, can we ever really move forward with what we are doing? If we always just stay on the safe side, are we actually ever going to make a huge amount of progress? Now, you might recognize the person in the picture. That's actually me when I was 6 and at school. And I was quite a good learner. I mean, you know, I'm here now, I can do the basic things that I was meant to do. But the one thing that my teachers always wrote in my end of year reports, every year, until I was about 12, was Amy needs to stop just taking the same safe path all the time. She needs to remember to challenge herself and to take risks. And it was something that my teachers kept saying to my parents, and my parents would try to explain to me, 6 years old, not really understanding what they were talking about. But I didn't like to make mistakes. I always wanted to get things right. So I didn't take risks. But when I finally got it, when I was 12, and I started to experiment and to just push myself a bit more, that's when academically I really started to do well. And I really remember that as being something, and not getting so worried about not getting 100% on things. So if we think about it in terms of an equation, a pictorial equation I've created for you. If we have a good teacher, and we have a good learner, and we do take risks, then all of those things together is what I believe will lead to success in the field of language learning. And if you take one of those elements away, that possibility of success reduces. It doesn't necessarily mean that it disappears, because as we discussed before, there are lots of other variables. But I think all of those things make a bit of a sort of a tidy package to take us forward. Okay, now we've talked quite a bit about success. I'd like to talk a little bit about failure. A lot of people see success and failure as being 2 points on a continuum. So you are either successful at something, or you are not very successful, or you're somewhere in the middle. You might be kind of successful, but sometimes things don't work out, or it might be didn't work very well at all, but there are some things about it that were okay. But what I suggest is that actually, and it's not just me, there are plenty of others who say the same thing, is that we should reposition ourselves when we're thinking about failure and success. And we should reposition ourselves on the other side of failure, so that we accept that to get to success, we need to fail. We need to take risks, we need to try things out, we need to experiment, and be happy to fail. and to know that things aren't always going to be successful. So, for example, if we're trying something out in the classroom, or we hear about something at a conference like this, and we think, oh, that might work, but I'm not sure. Oh, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to try it because I don't know if it's going to be successful. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think it's better to try it, and if it doesn't work, think about why it didn't work, then try it again. Think about if it still doesn't work, think about why it didn't work. Don't give up just because you are not achieving what you want to achieve the first time. And I said, it's not just me who says things like this. So Winston Churchill said exactly the same thing. And this is another example of someone who I think we can decide has been quite successful. In the UK, everybody's very excited because we're just about to issue a new banknote, and for the first time it will have Sir Winston Churchill on the banknote. So just as Jensen Button has got his bridge, I think Sir Winston Churchill would probably be quite happy and feel quite successful that he is now going to be in everybody's pocket. Okay, but it's easy to say this. It's easy to say, yeah, okay, I need to try things out, and then I'm going to be successful, hopefully. I'll try it out again if it doesn't work, fine. But it's not enough just to think about ourselves moving through this pathway. There are other elements that are necessary for this to be successful. We need to have a bit of courage. We need to be a bit brave to take these risks. When I was 6 years old, that's what I was lacking. I was a bit nervous and worried about making mistakes. I didn't have that courage that I needed to do it. But the other thing that I've been thinking about as teachers and as people working in education, we need to have support as well. And it's not something that we can do by ourselves. We need to know that we are supported by the people that we work with, by our students, and that we are able to make mistakes, and that there isn't a culture that we work in or that we teach in where people are afraid of making mistakes because they're afraid of what other people will say and that other people will brand them as being a failure and not appreciating that it's just a step towards being more successful. So when we think about this support then, I would say that there are 6 areas that we can think about to provide this kind of support. The first one is, of course, our colleagues, the people that we work with. For teachers, this could involve doing peer observations, inviting teachers to come and watch us teach, going to watch other teachers to see what they're doing, see what works, what doesn't work, how can we apply what they're doing to our own context. And also, informally, discussing ideas about things. Oh, I heard about this thing in the conference, it sounds really good, but what do you think? I'm not sure if it will work with the kind of students that we teach. I can't remember a time that I had a discussion with a teacher or a fellow colleague about something I wasn't sure about, and I didn't come away with more ideas than I had when I first started talking to them. We also, of course, need support from the department heads that we work with, from the people in the institution, again, to support us when we're trying things out and experimenting, and understanding that things don't always go perfectly well, but that we are ready and able to look at why things didn't work and to decide how we are going to do it differently next time in order for it to work. And similarly with school administrators, I don't know how many of you work in schools, but something I hear time and time again, and it may also be the case in universities, is we can't possibly try and do that because it makes too much noise and I will get in trouble with the other teachers and with the administrators in my school. But again, I think this is something that we just need to talk about and to discuss. Yes, it might be noisy. Yes, it might be messy. It might not work out the first time. But let's try it. Let's experiment. We don't have to always do things exactly the same way that we've always been doing them. Also from our students, or if we're not teaching directly, from the people that we work with, the people who receive whatever it is that we are producing. If we're writing research articles, can we find some way of getting feedback from the people who are reading them, who they are aimed at? Can we get some can we get some feedback from them on the things that work and the things that don't work as well? With students, thinking about this idea of continuous assessment, in doing it in a non-threatening way so that it's more about, it has the 2 strands of students being able to follow how well they're doing at something and how well they are learning, but also for the teacher to see whether the ways that we are approaching teaching particular areas is working out or not. Perhaps most importantly is the idea of ourselves and taking time to reflect on what we are doing and whether or not it's working. And keeping a diary or even just a notebook with just a few points that we note down when we try new things out. Did it work? Why not? And again, coming back to that idea of if it worked, brilliant, but why did it work? We can't just say, that was great, it was an excellent lesson, or this was a brilliant session that I did, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Why did it work? Was it because of you? Was it because of the materials that you were using? Or was it luck? Did you happen to have a particularly nice group of students who were very happy that day and happy to do everything you said, but actually, if you'd done it with a different group of students, would it not have worked so well? So it's trying to remember to pick apart everything that we do and think when we're experimenting and thinking about why something worked or why it didn't. And finally, also, there are lots of online communities that we can be involved in and places that we can discuss more broadly, thinking about, with this conference, thinking about it in the global context. The great thing about teaching English is it happens all over the world, and being involved in this field, we can be connected to people in pretty much any country. And the way that we can do this, obviously, is through the internet. The British Council has this fabulous resource, and I'm not just saying that because I work for the British Council, it is a fabulous resource, teachingenglish.org.uk, loads and loads of lesson ideas and articles and resources, all sorts of things on there. And specific to India, we also have this Facebook page, Teach English in India, where we promote events, but we also post interesting links to other things that are happening around the world in ELT. And it's a great place to discuss things with other teachers who are working in similar contexts. So finally, these are the things that I really wanted for people to take away from this. And just to think about what success is, how do you measure it for yourself? Whatever it is that your role is, I know that we have a mixed audience, we don't all do the same things. So thinking about it for you, how do you know when you've been successful? How can you measure it? And remembering that we measure it in different ways. It might not be always the most obvious way that we need to look at. Thinking about celebrating successes and also celebrating our failures. A failure isn't something just to be shoved in a box and forgotten about. It's something that we need to unpick and think about why it didn't work and learn lessons from it. And finally, and most importantly, is this idea of experimenting and trying new things, because I think only by doing that do we continue to develop ourselves and to keep things interesting for our students or for our colleagues or for the other people that we work with. Thank you very much.
Any questions based on our plenary? Come on. I'm sure there would be some.
Or if not, you can catch me all day today. I'll be around, so please do come and say hello. I'm very happy to chat.
Yes, there's one over here. There's one.
Success. So ways of measuring success.
Can you have the mic, please, so that everybody can hear you?
I'd like to know some ways of measuring success.
Well, I think that it's quite a big question, because I think it depends on what you want to measure that you've been successful at. So I think it depends on what you're measuring.
I'd like to know how you would measure success in the classroom as a teacher between our students.
Okay, so I think, as I said at the end there, I think there's different avenues for those measurements. I think we need to kind of do a 360-degree way of measuring by asking the students for their feedback on whatever it is that you're trying out. So you reflecting yourself on what you're doing and thinking about whether or not it worked. If it's something that you want to measure in terms of whether they have learned a particular thing, then you could do an informal kind of assessment. Perhaps you might do that later to see whether it's been retained. You might do it in a week or in a couple of weeks to come back to it, see whether or not it's something that was taken on board or not. And also this idea of getting your peers to come in and observe particular things that you're trying out. come and have a look, explain to them beforehand that you're trying something new, that you'd like to get their feedback, and then they can come and give you some of their view on whether or not it was successful. But yes, it depends on what you're doing, and you need to think about how you're going to measure whether something's been successful before you start to do it. I think that's quite important.
Thank you. I think there's one more question over there.
First, thank you for the nice presentation. Then, would you please share with us?
Can you please identify yourself?
I am Shira from the English and Foreign Language Hyderabad. Could you please share with us some techniques that could be used by the teacher to encourage the students to take risks inside the classroom, especially if they are from a foreign language context?
To encourage students to take risks?
Yes.
I think that really, a lot of that comes down to creating an atmosphere in the classroom that is positive and that where students don't feel that they will get any negative feedback if they do make mistakes. And that comes from both the teacher, but it also comes from other students. And I think in some class environments, students can be not very supportive of each other. And they can laugh when students make mistakes, or, especially if you have a class where there is a big mixture, where you have students who are very, very good at English and other students who have very low levels of language. So I think that's something, depending on the age of the students, that's something that you can discuss with them directly. Depending on the level of the students, you could get them to discuss it. You could give them the question, how can I encourage you to take risks, and they can discuss it. It depends on exactly who your students are. But I think it's something that you need to be aware of and need to look at how you can create a supportive environment and not be tolerant of students laughing at mistakes. If it seems to be, the thing is that sometimes mistakes can be funny, and everyone laughs and that's fine. But if it's laughing in a way that is being mean and ridiculing somebody, that's something that you need to just not tolerate as a teacher and make it clear that you're not going to.